Don't move. Where is it?
I don't know what you mean!
The money. Now!
Please don't!
Let me go! Keep moving.
Almost there.
February 11, 1952, Lenox Avenue, 2:47 p.m. The dress shop smelled of new fabric and gardenia perfume. Mayme Johnson stood in front of the full-length mirror in a navy crepe gown, turning slowly while the seamstress pinned the hem. A shadow fell across the glass. Charlie Cross Morrison, 6'3", neck and forearms covered in fresh KKK tattoos, stepped behind her, pressed the cold barrel of a .38 into her lower back, and hissed one word. Move. He had no idea the woman he just grabbed was Mayme Johnson. He had no idea her husband was the most feared and respected black man in America. And he had no idea that, exactly 4 hours from this second, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson would walk straight through a ring of 200 police officers and reporters carrying nothing but a straight razor and change Harlem forever. Mayme had come to Mrs. Pearl's dress shop on Lenox to buy something special for their 4th wedding anniversary. Bumpy was in a meeting downtown. She told him she'd be fine alone. She was never alone in Harlem, not really. Shoppers, delivery boys, numbers runners, all eyes quietly watched over the queen. Charlie Cross Morrison had just arrived from Georgia, fresh out of prison, burning with hate, and recruited into a tiny KKK cell that operated secretly above a bar on 145th Street. 3 mistakes defined his short life. Thinking New York was the same as the South. Thinking a gun and tattoos made him untouchable. Touching Mayme Johnson. Morrison shoved Mayme toward the back exit. Customers screamed. The seamstress dropped her pins. Mayme didn't scream. She looked Morrison dead in the eye and said, voice ice cold, "You just signed your own death certificate." Morrison laughed. "Your people don't scare me, girl." He dragged her toward the alley. That's when the first phone call went out. Within 6 minutes, the entire block knew. Within 12 minutes, every Numbers bank on Lenox Avenue had shut its doors. Within 20 minutes, Bumpy Johnson was in his car heading uptown. No sirens, no panic. Just the quiet click of his straight razor opening and closing in his hand. By 4:15 p.m., the 28th precinct had surrounded the dress shop and the alley. Morrison was barricaded inside a back room with Mayme as hostage. Captain Daniel O'Brien stood with 200 officers and reporters forming a cordon across Lenox Avenue. They expected Bumpy to arrive with an army. He arrived alone. 4:47 p.m., exactly 4 hours after the grab. Bumpy Johnson stepped out of a black Cadillac wearing a charcoal overcoat and fedora. No bodyguards, no visible weapon. He walked straight toward the police line. 200 cops, reporters, and Harlem residents stood completely still. Not a single person moved. Bumpy reached the barricade. Captain O'Brien blocked his path. Bumpy looked him in the eye and said softly, "Captain, my wife is in there, step aside." The captain hesitated 1 second. Then he moved. The entire line parted like the Red Sea. 200 people watched in absolute silence as Bumpy Johnson walked through, straight razor glinting once in his palm, and disappeared into the alley door. What happened inside that back room was never written in any police report. No sirens screamed, no badges flashed, no official record ever existed, because some nights Harlem handled its own justice and the city looked the other way. Charlie Cross Morrison, once a proud Klansman from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, inked black swastikas and crossed burning torches etched across his forearms, had made the fatal mistake of stepping into Harlem thinking his past still carried weight. He'd grabbed Mayme Johnson by the arm in broad daylight on Lenox Avenue, snarling threats, flashing those hate-stained tattoos like badges of honor. He thought the old fear would still work. He was wrong. Bumpy had arrived like a storm cloud rolling in off the river, quiet, inevitable. He didn't shout, he didn't draw first. He simply walked Morrison into the back room of a shuttered dress shop, the one Mayme had been browsing in moments earlier. Door clicked shut, lock turned. And then the lesson began. Morrison later told his cellmate, in a whisper that shook the bars, he had never been more terrified in his life. Not in the trenches of wartime scraps, not on death row staring down the electric chair, not even when he'd escaped custody and run north thinking Harlem would be soft. Bumpy didn't fire a shot he didn't need to. No blood stained the floorboards that night. He simply spoke calmly, precisely, every word measured like a chess move, for 12 long minutes. He spoke of Harlem mothers who walked their children to school with eyes on every shadow. Of churches that still smelled of smoke from crosses burned on lawns. Of boys like his own nephew whose lives were snuffed out and called accidents by men who wore white hoods and cowardice in equal measure. He spoke of promises that any hand raised against his people, against his wife, would find no mercy, no distance great enough to hide, no badge or robe thick enough to shield. Morrison started strong, spitting curses, chest puffed under his cheap suit. By minute 4, his voice cracked. By minute 7, sweat poured down his face, soaking through the collar, dripping onto the concrete like rain. By minute 10, the big man was on his knees, shoulders heaving, tears cutting clean tracks through the grime on his cheeks. He begged. Not for his life, Bumpy hadn't threatened it directly. He begged to be arrested. Begged for cuffs, for bars, for anything that would put steel and distance between him and the man standing over him. When the police finally arrived, tipped anonymously, arriving slow and deliberate, they found Morrison exactly like that. Crumpled on the floor, sobbing, hands raised in surrender, pleading for protection from the one man who hadn't even touched him. Mayme walked out untouched. She paused only long enough to smooth her dress, adjust her hat, then stepped straight into Bumpy's waiting arm. He embraced her gently right there in the doorway, under the dim street lamp, as if the night had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. They left together, footsteps soft on the Harlem pavement, the city swallowing them back into its rhythm. Behind them, Morrison was cuffed and led away, still muttering prayers. The officers exchanged glances but asked no questions. Some stories don't need ink. Some lessons are written in silence, in sweat, in the way a man's spine turns to water when he finally understands. Harlem doesn't forget. And Bumpy Johnson doesn't forgive. That night, the message rippled outward, no headlines, no trials, just whispers in back rooms and barbershops from 125th to the river. Touch what's ours and you'll beg for the law to save you from what comes next. Here's Mayme herself, elegant, unbreakable, the queen who stood beside the king. And Bumpy in the years that followed, still the quiet storm everyone feared. The throne stayed his. Because some lessons are taught without a single bullet. Just 12 minutes of truth and a lifetime of fear. 5. Charlie Cross Morrison was sentenced to 15 years for kidnapping and assault. He served exactly 93 days. On the 93rd day, he was found hanging in his cell at Sing Sing. Official ruling, suicide. Harlem knew better. The remaining members of the KKK cell quietly disbanded within a month. None were ever seen in New York again. Mayme and Bumpy celebrated their anniversary 3 days late. They ate fried chicken at Wells, held hands across the table, and never spoke of Charlie Morrison again. But every old-timer on Lenox Avenue still tells the story. The day a KKK man grabbed Bumpy's wife. The day 200 people stood completely still. The day Harlem reminded the world that some queens are protected by something far stronger than guns. Respect.